We are starting from the bottom line of Daf Kuf Tez Zayin Amud Beis, as this is being done second time, especially for our TorahAnytime.com viewers, who we very much appreciate. And although we don't see you, we feel you're part of our family. So, by Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel, when we said if the ceiling collapses and Shelley, who lives on the downstairs, doesn't want to repair it, so Eddie, who lives upstairs, he comes down to live downstairs, can he evict the landlord, Shelley, from the house? Kishudar, Levada Hudar Kidmekar, does he live downstairs alone, like he lived upstairs alone? Or perhaps he has to bunk together with Shelley. Shneim Darim, they both live together, to Amalei, because Shelley says, listen, I know I was Meshabed the downstairs to you, but Adatalapkina, that I should get evicted into the street, Loy Agrilach, that far I didn't rent it to you with that in mind. Now, Imtim Salai Mishnei and Darim, if we say that they both live together downstairs, Kishu Mishtamish, when Eddie, the upstairs guy, enters, Derek Psakim Mishtamish, can he now come in from the downstairs door like Shelley? Or does he have to go upstairs, the outside steps that he usually took to get to his second floor story, and then come down through a ladder through the hole in the ceiling? Me, Omar, can Shelley tell him, listen, Mac, Kidamei Kara, like you did in the beginning. Mame Kara Derek Gagan, just like in the beginning, you went up the steps. Hashtanami Derek Gagan. Dilma, or perhaps Matzi Amalei, Eddie could tell Shelley, look, Aliyah Kibili Alai, to go up steps I accepted, but Aliyah Varida, to go up and then go down a ladder to get to my house, that like Kabili Alai. Now, Imtim Salaimer Matzi Amalei, he could tell Shelley, Aliyah Varida like Kabili Alai, I didn't have in mind to go up and down. What would be if it's Shtei Aliyahs Zu Al Gabzu? What if it would be that there's a second story and a third story? So, if Chesel El Yaina, if the third story, the floor caves in, so then Nachis V'dar B'Tachtaina. Then the landlord could tell him, go to the second story, which is a benefit for Eddie, because he had to walk up all the way to the third story, and now he's in the second story. But if the second story collapses, can Shelley tell him, okay, move up to the third floor? Mi Amrinan, can Shelley say, look, Eddie, I told you I'm giving you an aliyah. Aliyah is an upper apartment. So go up to the third floor. That's also an upper apartment. You accepted an upper apartment. The third story is also an upper apartment. Or perhaps Chad Aliyah Kabbalah. Eddie says, look, I can walk up one flight. Shtei Aliyahs, a second flight, like Kabbalah, that I didn't accept. Teku, Tishbi Yataritz, Kushas Vibayas. Now, Rabbi Yossi Aimer, Hatachtoin, Noisin es Hatikra. Rabbi Yossi says that if the ceiling collapses, so Shelley has to supply the ceiling, and Eddie has to supply the plaster. The Tanakama holds Shelley has to supply everything. So my Tikra, what does it mean? The Gemara assumes now that the actual ceiling beams, they didn't collapse. The ceiling beams are very strong. That's not what collapsed. So my ticker, what does it mean that Shelley's, the landlord, supplies the ceiling? Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Amar Kinim Usnan. It's reeds and thorns that is used to put in between. It's a mesh of reeds and thorns that's put running across the ceiling beams. Ustini Amar Reb Shimon Lakish, that's a name. Ustini says in the name of Reb Shimon Lakish, Levachim, they're slats, wooden slats. But like they're not arguing, Markiasri. Each one is locality. The locality is to use a mesh of reeds and thorns, and one is to use slats. Now, Hanu Trey, there were two people. They have a dairei chad iloi v'chad tatoi. One lived on the top, that's Eddie, and one lived on the bottom, that's Shelley. Right? Chad iloi, one lived on the top, and one lived on the bottom. Ifches maziva, the plaster deteriorated. Why? Because Eddie washes his hands, and most people, wash it in the sink. But Eddie doesn't have, he's not in the mood to walk to the sink, so he washes his hands and it falls on the ground. Because after all, Eddie's never living in the same place. He doesn't care what happens, if it's the Hyatt in Orlando or the Hilton in Houston or in the Marriott in Wyoming. He doesn't care. So he washes his hands and it falls onto the floor. And since it fell onto the floor, it eroded the plaster. So says the Gemara, Ifchas Maziva, the plaster eroded, Kimashi Maya Eloi. So now, when Eddie washes his hands, Ozle Umaske Letatoi, it damages Shelley downstairs. So the Gemara says, Mi Mesakin, who has to fix it? Rab Chia bar Abba Amar Ha'elyon Mesakin, Eddie has to fix it. Rabbi Loi Mishim Rab Chia bar Yosef Amar Ha'tachtoin Mesakin, Shelley has to fix it. Now, if you want to remember that it's Reb Yossi who says it's Shelley on the bottom that has to fix it, V'simen v'Yosef hurid Mitzrayim. Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, so Yosef is like Yossi. It's Reb Yossi who says that the one on the bottom, Shelley on the bottom, has to fix it. So the Gemara wants to say that this is the argument that we have, whether it's the one that does the damage that has to distance himself, or the one that's getting damaged that has to protect himself. So if you hold that it's the one who does the damage that has to distance himself, so then Eddie has to fix it. If the one who's getting damaged has to distance himself, so then Shelley on the bottom has to fix it. So the Gemara wants to say, Leimer Rab Chia bar Abba v'Rabbi Loi beplukted Rab Yossi Rabbanan kamifli. Lamandi Amar Ha'elyon Misakin, the one that says that Eddie has to fix it, Kasavra alamazik laharchik esatzmei min hanizik. It's on the damager to distance himself from the one that's getting damaged. Now Eddie is the quintessential damager. Right? So Eddie is, that's why, what do you think is shrouded in darkness there? Eddie is the quintessential damager. So therefore, and he's always on the run, again in the car, he's the quintessential damager, so he has to fix it. While the one that says, the one that says that Shelley has to fix it, it's upon the victim to distance himself, and therefore since Shelley is getting sprayed upon, he has to fix it. Says the Gemara, the Tizbara, Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan le'inyan nizakin pligi. Do you think Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan argue about damages? Aiva ipcha shaminan lahu. We know that they have an opposite opinion. The Tanan marchikin esa ilan min abar esrim v'chamesh ama. You have to distance a tree from a bar 25 amas, because the roots of the tree damage the bar. Ubacharaybu b'shikma, and in a carob tree and a sycamore tree whose roots extend further, chamishim amma. Now this is true, bein milmala, bein min atzad. This is true whether the bar, the pit, is higher than the tree or on level with the tree. Because if it's higher than the tree, then the roots will go into the very wall of the if it's much higher, then the roots will undermine the bottom of the bar. They'll undermine the bottom of the bar. If it's on the same level, they'll go into the walls of the bar. Now, ima bar kadam, if the pit is there from before, and then the person planted the tree, kaitates, the owner of the tree has to cut down the tree, v'nosein dabin, and the owner of the pit compensates him for cutting down the tree. Ima ilan kadam, if the tree was first, so the tree was planted legally, then lo yakutz, then he doesn't have to cut it down. Suffix zeh kadam v'suffix zeh kadam. If we're not sure which one was first, lo yakutz. While Rabbi Yossi Aimer, afal pisha bor kaidemes le'ilan, even if the pit is before the tree, still lo yakutz. He doesn't have to cut down the tree. Why? Because shezeh chayfer b'seich shalai v'zeh neitea b'seich shalai. Because each one could do in their property what they want, and it's on the nizik to distance himself. So here you see to the contrary, that Rabbi Yossi holds that it's on the nizik to distance himself. Alma Rabbi Yossi savra ala nizik laharchik esatzmai, v'Rabbanan savra ala mazik laharchik esatzmai. It's the mazik who has to be marchik and cut down the tree. Eli ika l'meimer pligi, if you want to say that they're arguing about something, they're arguing between beplukta the Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan and the Hasam k'miflegi. If you want to say that they're arguing about something, they're arguing about the machloikis Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan over there, which is about being machikis asmai. So our Mishnah stims with the second. Our not Mishnah, our teaching over here that we learned out Rabbi Yosef Hurid Mitzrayma, and we said that Rav Yosef holds that it's on Shelley to distance himself, the one on the bottom to distance himself. So that's like this second version, right? Where we see that Rabbi Yossi holds that it's on the one who makes the tree to distance it, and excuse me, it's on the one who builds the bird to distance himself, and not the one who makes the tree. So here also, where Shelley is getting damaged from the water, he has to distance himself and repair the plaster. Now, V'Rab Yossi v'Rabbanan dahacha b'mai pligi. Oh, no, excuse me. No, 1 second. Right. Like I said, the Machloikis Reb Chia bar Abba and the Machloikis Reb Chia bar Rab Yossi parallels this Machloikis over here between the Rabbanan and Rab Yossi by the tree. But now the Gemara says, now the Gemara asks, In our Mishnah, right, in our Mishnah we say that if the ceiling collapses, so one Mandiyama holds, the Tanakama holds that Shelley on the bottom has to fix everything, the slats or the reeds and the thorns, and also the plaster, while Rabbi Yossi says that Shelley on the bottom has to give the slats or the reeds and the thorns, and Eddie has to supply the plaster. So what is that machlokes? Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan dahacha b'mait pligi, says the Gemara, they're arguing b'chayzik tikra kamifligi. They're arguing about strengthening the ceiling. Rabbanan savrei, Rabbanan hold maziva arzuke tikru. The plaster that's put on top of the slats, or the plaster that's put on top of the reed and thorn mesh, strengthens the ceiling, because otherwise, when Eddie will walk on top, the ceiling will shake. And to strengthen the ceiling, that's the responsibility of the landlord. While Rabbi Yossi Savar Maziva, the plaster is only a cosmetic thing. Rabbi Yossi Savar Maziva Ashvuye Gumoisu. The plaster is only to level the ground. It's only cosmetic. Vashvuye Gumois ala Elyon Lashvuye. A cosmetic thing, that's for Eddie to do. No, Eddie's very particular. If he sleeps in the car, he wants to make sure that it's level. Says the Gemara. Now let's go back to that which we said, that Rab Chia, Rab Yossi, remember Yosef Hurad Mitzrayma, Rab Chia Rab Yossi says that if Eddie's water is dripping on Shelley's head, it's on Shelley to fix the ceiling. Says Ini, V'amr Rav Ashi ki avina bei Rav Kahana, when I was in the academy of Rav Kahana, have amrinon maida Rav Yossi begirei delay. Rav Yossi is maida if it's a direct arrow. Here it seems to be as soon as Eddie washes its hand, it falls on Shelley's head. It falls on his, grand piano and does damage. Shelley's not going to stand for that. No way, Jose. Right? Says the Gemara, says the Gemara, you're right, this is not direct. The paske maya, first the water gets absorbed, and then it trickles, and then it comes down. The paske maya, it stops, v'hadar nafle, and then it comes down, so it's not girei delay, and since it's not girei delay, it's not a direct arrow, therefore it's upon Shelley to fix the ceiling. Now, Habayis va'aliyah shel shnayim shenaflu. The downstairs and the second story, the downstairs guy is Shelley, the one who lives upstairs is Eddie. It collapses. So Eddie says, Shelley, put up the first floor so I could put up my second floor. Amar Balaliyah Balabayis live nice. Eddie tells Shelley, build the ground floor. But Shelley is more into buying more pianos. Vu ain't a right to live nice. He says, look, I'll live in the park. I want to get 3 more pianos. So Vu ain't a right to live nice. He doesn't want to rebuild it. Eddie could build the ground floor. And live on the ground floor until Shelley pays him his expenses. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says, that's not cricket. That's Shelley's property he's living in. if Eddie is going to live in there, he's going to have to pay Shelley rent. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Av Zed Dor B'Seich Shel Chaveiroi, if he's going to live in Shelley's premises, Tzarech Lahalos Lo Yischar. Ella, Bala Aliyah Boineh Sabayis, he builds the downstairs, and Ves Aliyah, and the upstairs. Oh. And now he lives in Shelley's apartment. And doesn't let Shelley come in until he pays him for the expenses that he built the apartment. And then, Mekara Esel Yaina, he roofs a roof over the upper apartment. He doesn't have to make two roofs. He just puts a roof over the upper apartment, right? And then, V'yoysheb Abayis, and he dwells downstairs. Now he forces Shelley's hand to pay him. Now in this case, here he could say, look, I have my apartment already. I'll go upstairs. As soon as you pay me, I'll go upstairs. Now, obviously Rabbi Yehuda says that if Eddie lives downstairs without building a second apartment, he has to pay Shelley, even though Shelley wasn't going to build the apartment. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shloishim mekayim shana lanu Rabbi Yehuda. In 3 places, Rabbi Yehuda championed that also lo adam shiyahanem emamen chaveiroi, that you can't benefit from somebody else's money without paying them. You can't benefit from someone else's money without their consent. Rashi says, Shaloi b'matana, you can't benefit from someone else's property if he didn't give you a gift, unless it's with his consent, and he's pleased with it. So that's, says the Gemara, our case in our Mishnah, that Eddie can't live downstairs, even though Shelley didn't build it. But he can't live downstairs in Shelley's premises, and if he does without permission, he's going to have to pay him. Idach Mahi. What's the other example? The Tanan, Hanoisin Tsema Litzeva. If, let's say, Reuven gives wool to Dr. Black to dye, Litzvay Adam, he told him to dye it red, Vitzava Shachar, and he dyed it black. Shachar dyed black, Vitzava Edai. So Rameir holds that Dr. Black is kaineh et b'shinoi. He acquires it with the improvement. So Rameir Aimer Naisen Leidem ain't Simrai. All Dr. Black has to give Reuven is back the value of his wool. And that's it. Rabbi Yehuda again says, well, if that would be the case, then it turns out that Dr. Black is gaining that Reuven delivered him wool. Reuven delivered him wool without compensating Reuven for the delivery of the wool. So Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, no. If the improvement is more than the expenses, then Reuven benefits. And all he has to give Dr. Black is the expenses. Nice and le'yitzia. If the expense is more than the improvement, then all he has to give him is the improvement. Nice and le'yitzia. So again, we see that Rabbi Yehuda champions Reuven's ownership, original ownership of the wool, and says that Dr. Black can't benefit from it. He cannot benefit and keep the dyed wool and only give him the value of the wool, but rather Rabbi Yehuda champions the original owner of the wool. The idach mahi, and what's the third opinion? Ditnan misha para mikzas chayvai. If, let's say, Yitzi owes Nachman $1,000, and he pays Nachman 500 of the 1,000. Now, the simplest thing would have been that Nachman will keep the IOU note and give Yitzi a receipt for $500. Nachman could do that. But instead what they did is Nachman gave the promissory note to a third party. He gave it to Shalom. And Shalom is a witness that 500 of it is paid. It's like putting it in escrow. So, Hishlish Eshtarai. But when they did this arrangement, Yitzi told Nachman, V'amaloi im einani noisimach mikan va'ad zman ploini. If I don't pay you the other $500 by Purim, if I don't pay it by Purim, then Shalom, give him back the shtar. Tein lo shtara. And then Nachman will be able to collect the $1,000 again. So the Gemara says, Higia zman v'loi nasan. If Purim comes and Yitz didn't pay the other $500, Rabbi Yaisi says that Shalom should give back the shtar, and now Nachman could collect the full $1,000. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo yitin. He shouldn't give it. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda champions that you can't benefit from what's somebody else's money. Nachman already paid that $500. So Rabbi Yehuda champions, Yitzi already paid the $500. So Rabbi Yehuda champions that he's not going to be able to take $500 that was already paid. So the Gemara says, you can't make a rule out of these three things. There's no common denominator. Each one has its separate reason. Amai. Dilma, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds that Eddie can't move downstairs into Shelley's apartment without paying him is because he blackens the walls with the smoke. He blackens the wall with the smoke. Inami, the case of the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's not enough to return to Ruvain the wool is because Dr. Black deviated. And Kol HaMishana, Yodei Ala Tachtoina. If you deviate, Yodei Ala Tachtoina. It says the Gemara, Inami Litzoyel Adna Mitzvah Shacha, that's Mishum de Kamishana. Because Dr. Black deviated. Vatanan Kol HaMishana, Yodei Ala Tachtoina. And the reason why Shalom is not going to relinquish back the shtar after Purim to Nachman that he should collect the $1,000, that's a simple case of a smachta. Remember, we said a smachta leikanya. If somebody says something that's not equitable, I'll pay you the full $1,000 again. We say that he just never entertained the thought of that happening. That's an asmachta. He never thought it would happen, and therefore he never really meant it. B'shamina later Rabbi Yehuda dama leikani, that asmachta is not binding. Amar Rav Acha bar Adam Ishmei De'ula. Now here, Tachtoin habol shanois bigvil. Here, what happens is that Shelley, we shook Shelley up, and Shelley said, okay, I'll rebuild. But he wants to change the building materials from the first floor. Remember, Eddie owns the second floor, so he wants to change the building materials. So Bigvil Shaimenlai, if he wants to use uncut stone, now uncut stone is wider than cut stone. So if he wants to use uncut stone, then it's going to be a more firm foundation. So shaymelai. But because if it was initially the wider uncut stone, and now he wants to use cut stone, which is more narrow, then ain't shaymelai, because then Eddie is going to have less of a foundation. Bikfisin, if he wants to use half bricks, now half bricks is a tefach and a half parallel to each other, with a tefach of mortar in between. So that would be 4 tvachim wide, 1.5, and a tefach of mortar, that would be 4 tvachim. So instead of using a whole brick, which is only 3 tvachim wide, he wants to use 2 parallel half bricks with mortar in between, which is wider, 4 tvachim shaymelai. But if it was 2 half bricks with mortar, which is 4 tvachim, and now he wants to use just 1 brick, which is 3 tvachim, then it's less of a foundation, then ain't shaymelai. L'sachech ba'arazim, if he wants to make a ceiling with beams of cedar, initially it had beams of sycamore, but cedar is even more permanent. So the sachik barazin shaymelai. Bishkamim, but if it was originally cedar and now he wants to downgrade it to sycamore, ain't shaymelai. Lemait b'chaloinus, if Shelley wants to make less windows means that it's more sturdy. It has more wall. So if he wants to decrease the windows, that's okay. It'll be a firmer foundation. Laharbais b'chaloinus, to make more windows, ain't shaymelai. We don't listen to him. Lagvia, if he wants to make it higher, so now Eddie will have to walk up more steps, ain't shaymelai. Lamait, if he wants to make it lower, then shaymelai. Now, the next Gemara follows, mamish in the reverse. It's logical in the reverse. Here now, Eddie starts playing the games. Until now, it was Shelley. Now it's Eddie. I know where Eddie is. Eddie is in some kind of a prison or something. Eddie? Is that Alcatraz? He's in a mall. Anyway, is that the Pentagon? Now, anyway, he's in an underground bunker. Now, look at all that piping. So here, now Eddie wants to deviate. Eddie wants to deviate on the upper story. Elyon Shabalashanais, because if he wants to use cut stones, so cut stones is narrower, so it'll be less of a burden onto Shali Shaimelai. If he wants to use Bigvil, if he wants to use the uncut stones, which is wider, and then it'll be a bigger burden, ain't Shaimelai. Bikfisin, if he wants to use the 2 parallel half bricks with the mortar in between, which is 4 tvachim instead of 1 brick, which is 3 tvachim, ain't shaymelai. Again, it would be a bigger burden. B'leveinim, if he wants to downgrade from 2 half bricks and mortar to 1 brick, so it'll be less of a burden, shaymelai. Ba'arazim, if he wants to use for his upper ceiling cedar, which is heavier, ain't shaymelai. B'shikma, which is lighter, shaymelai. The rabbis b'chalainus, more windows, so it'll be lighter on Shelley's foundation, shaymelai. L'mayit b'chalainus, so it'll be more walls and more heavier, ain't shaymelai. Lagvia, to make it higher, so it'll be a bigger burden on Shelley, ain't shaymelai. L'mayit, to make it lower, shaymelai. Now, what happens if neither Shelley or Eddie could afford to rebuild, and they both want to sell the land and go on Aliyah? The question is, does Eddie have any rights in the land? So of course Shelley says, Eddie, it was nice knowing you. Get lost. You have the upper story. You don't have any rights in the land. So ein loy lezeh v'loy lezeh mai. What's the din? So the Gemara has now three opinions. Tanya, ein loy lezeh v'loy lezeh, ein loy lebal aliyah b'karka klum. Eddie, sayonara. You don't have any rights in the land, which is, the story of Eddie's life. Look where he's traveling all over the globe, the wandering Jew. While Reb Nosson tachtoi noitel shnei chalakim, Shelley takes 2/3, the Elyon shlish, and Eddie takes 1/3. V'acherim oimrim, and others say tachtoi noitel shloisha chalakim, that Shelley takes 3/4, the Elyon noitel revia. Abba Rabbah, so Rabbah says the middle opinion. Reb Nosson is a great dayan. Reb Nosson was a very deep dayan. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbah nekait de Reb Nosson biyadcha. Hold fast Reb Nosson's opinion in your hand. The dainahu, he is a very skilled judge, and always v'nachitz le'umka dedina. He always plummets the depth of the law, because he said you have to look when somebody lives on the second floor, it shortens the life of the ground floor. If the ground floor, if it didn't have a second story on it, it would last for 300 years. That's the way it works. But with a second story on top of it, it lasts for 200 years. So it takes away from the lifespan 1/3. And therefore it's likely that Eddie owes 1/3 of the real estate. And that's what the Gemara says. Kasavar, kama mafsid aliyah babayis, how much does the second story detract from the lifespan of the first story? Tilsa, 1/3. And therefore Hilkach Islay Tilsa. Shelley, although he was ready to not give anything to Eddie, will have to give. If the land is being sold for $3 million, Shelley, fork over $1 million. $1 million to Eddie. We are going to do the Mishnah Yomis now. And again, remember, Rabbi Isai, I'm expecting you all to be ambassadors, to bring new people for Thursday night. Thursday night, Bava Basra. Bava Basra, what a great opportunity. And we want to thank Shalom Fogel for agreeing to sponsor Bava Basra. Also, Menachem Umansky's father is going to also be sponsoring Bava Basra. And we might have a third sponsor for Bava Basra as well, and which is fine. It's a very, very long Masechta. We will now learn the Mishnah Yomis.